We're live on YouTube, everybody. We're starting the webinar, 3, 2, 1. And I'll drop the link in a second.
If I fall, I stand up, break these walls, I rise up. Even when I lose it, I'll always got my eyes up. They praying on my downfall, but I'll never give up. 1,000 cuts won't be enough to keep my fists in these cuffs. And I'm never breaking down when the odds against me. Brown girl, gold crown with the gods within me. Yeah, I was a flower that bloomed in a dark room. Flows like monsoons from the womb, and I write move ruins and resume.
Welcome, Local District Central families. Thank you for joining us. We're waiting for folks to come in. Just a couple seconds.
Disappear, but they living through these words that I'm painting here. Tell me you'll remember me. I'm here to build a legacy. I got the ground moving under me. 1,000 cuts ain't never stopping me. And I swear I'm never giving up. Who I am and why I'm standing up. And I ain't ever need no ounce of luck to understand myself, cause that's enough. Yeah, that's enough. I can live 1,000 cuts. I can live 1,000 cuts. Then live a life just covering up. What would you die for? What do you live for? When it's resistance met with an uproar. I'm trying to love more. We've had enough war. Too many stones in our hands and these guns drawn. They try to press me till I stumble down, but not this time. I go 0 to 100 now. They'll never silence me. My voice will be denied, and I'm challenging the system. No, it won't be televised, and I'll never. When the freedom ain't free, and so let's keep the hope alive. Yeah, I see it in me from the cloudest to my killings from the.
Welcome, Local District Central families, to the We Stand Together Asian American Voices for our Filipino Community Town Hall. Bienvenidos, familias del Distrito Local Central. Les damos una cordial bienvenida a este foro comunitario para nuestra sesión llamada Nos Mantenemos Unidos, Voces Asiáticas Americanas. Esta noche es representante de nuestra comunidad filipina. Before starting, I'd like to inform you that this town hall will be presented in English and we will have simultaneous Spanish translation. To listen to this presentation in Spanish, you would need to click on the language option on the world icon you see on your screen and we'll select Spanish to begin. Antes de comenzar, les informamos que este foro será presentado en inglés y tendremos traducción simultánea en español. Para escuchar en español, oprima el símbolo del mundo y podrá ver el icono que indica español en su pantalla para poder empezar. During this virtual town hall session, you will have an opportunity to ask questions of our panelists during the presentation. On your screen, you will see a Q&A icon and can type in your questions. At the conclusion of this presentation, we will respond to as many questions that we can as time permits. Also, this session will be video recorded. In addition, we are live on YouTube. You'll see it on the chat. Now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce Mrs. Myrna Reynoso from Local District Central's School Mental Health Unit. Mrs. Reynoso, welcome.
Thank you, and good evening, everyone. I wanted to just take this opportunity to share that during these difficult times, that it's okay to not be okay, and that our mental health is just as important as our physical health. So I wanted to share these numbers that to offer you to get help if you need it. We have the LAUSD Wellness Hotline, that's 213-241-3840, and our county mental health hotline, that's 1-800 854-7771, and that's available 24 hours a day. Thank you, and I'll pass it to Mr. Spicer.
Thank you, Mrs. Reynoso. Thank you so much. Good afternoon, students, families, community partners, and to Local District Central, the home of the champions. I'm Andre Spicer. I'm one of your administrators of instruction, along with my colleague and my friend, Mrs. Julie Gonzalez. We would like to welcome you to our town hall meeting tonight, where we are recognizing, honoring, and supporting our Asian American community, with our Filipino American community in particular tonight. As you may well know, our instructional focus here in Local District Central is concentrated through an equity lens. Everything that we do here in Local District Central, we honor and validate while affirming all of our various cultures and our students and their families. They make us better together with their multitude of gifts. The Filipino community has been absolutely an integral part of Local District Central, the fabric of what we have here in Los Angeles. We would not be one without the contributions of the Filipino American community. In Local District Central, we serve over 1,800 Filipino students, and we're very proud to do so. So we're very happy to have you here tonight. Next slide. Now, I would like to introduce our very own Mrs. Veronica Herrera. She is our Director of Transformation. My friend, welcome, Mrs. Herrera.
Thank you, Mr. Spicer, for that very kind introduction. Welcome, everyone. And we at Local District Central stand together with our Asian American voices. Today, we will be covering our Asian American Pacific Islander experience through the lens of Mr. Roxas, who will give us his Filipino American story. We will also have the opportunity for some questions and answers, and we will have some closing thoughts at the end. And next, but we cannot go on with our presentation unless we remind you that today is our Thoughtful Thursday. So please take a moment to thank someone, say hello to someone that you might not know, but what we know is that the more we boost our good endorphins is healthy for all of us. So thank you. Next. And we at Local District Central continue to work together with all our champions. And these are our 7 norms of collaboration, where we pause, where we presume positive intentions, we put our ideas together at the table, we pay attention not only to ourselves, but to others, and we provide data so that our learning can have more impact on all of us. We paraphrase our ideas so that others could understand and perhaps make it more meaningful for all of us to learn. And we also pose questions. And just a gently and friendly reminder that these are our norms of collaboration. Everyone here is muted. This is a webinar. We ask that you please place your questions in the chat. We ask that you please be patient with our technology today and every day, and please presume your positive intentions. And all your emojis and your reactions you could actually put in the chat. And we ask that you please be present throughout this session. And our learning for this evening will not be, we keep our triple track agenda in mind. Our first track is that we are all individual learners. We share with others. And more importantly, we take back to our schools and our communities. And next, I would like to pass it back to our wonderful, awesome, and incredible Administrator of Instruction, Mr. Andre Spicer. Mr. Spicer.
Thank you again, Mrs. Herrera. Our instructional foci, as I mentioned to you earlier here in Local District Central, rigorous grade level instruction, rigorous grade level standard-based learning in all that we do. We want to make sure that our students are engaged with activities that are fun, that will prepare them for college and career. all the way from our class of 2021, who is graduating here in a few days. Congratulations to our scholars, and to our smallest students who will be graduating in 2032. Our equity lens, again, everything that we do from a space where we're trying to encourage those who have been unheard. Our English learners, our students at the margins, including those with IEPs, our students who identify with different genders, those who are unheard, our Black students. Our initiative this year was Black Students Matter. We see you, we hear you. And that has been a fabulous experience for all of our families and communities and our students. Finally, universal design for learning. We want to make sure that all of our students have access. We want to meet them where they are. The expectation is not that they find us, but that we find them and make a safe space in the classroom accessible to their learning styles. Speaking of learning styles and the equity lens and our instructional foci, we have to introduce our leader. The superintendent of Local District Central is Mrs. Frances Baez, and she is always committed to every single student in Local District Central, to all of our families and communities. She is leading the way. She is a path setter as it relates to equity and social justice. Please with me, welcome Mrs. Baez. Mrs. Baez, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Spicer. I thank you for leading this town hall today. I'm very excited to hear the presentation from Mr. Roxas, which is emphasizing our Filipino American population. This month, we want to acknowledge all of our Asian American brothers and sisters through these town halls to learn more about each one of them and to learn how to be better allies. We are allies. We want to go deeper in that allyship, and he's going to tell us all about how to do that. But I want to thank our board members for creating the culture and climate that allows for these kinds of forums to take place, where we can highlight our populations that are and our students that are in our schools. In Local District Central, the home of the champions, we are actually the geography of Filipino Town, Koreatown, Little Tokyo, Chinatown, and the diverse Asian populations in our community. And it is our pleasure to highlight the culture and the heritage of our community, because it's through those assets where we get that ownership and that pride, and we are connected to our schools. When our schools are connected to us and our origins, there's an ownership and a love and an embrace for what we're learning. That is why we have these town halls. And so it is my distinct pleasure to offer these. I thank Mr. Spicer and the Local District Central team members who have made this possible. This is groundbreaking. We've never done this before, but it takes a village to be able to offer these opportunities for our school communities. And now I would like to introduce one of our board members who's here with us to share remarks. I want to welcome board member Jackie Goldberg from Board District 5, who is a champion and an ally, and is always pushing us to do something new and different, and embraces the community schools effort in all of our schools. Representing Board District 5, I'd like to welcome Honorable Board Member Jackie Goldberg. Thank you for being with us today.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I truly appreciate it. And I truly appreciate these webinars. You know, we have such a diverse school population. And yet, no matter how hard you try or how many times you look at it, it's very difficult to know all of the various cultures that make up this wonderful district. It really is that pattern of having multiracial and multi-ethnic schools that make LA Unified so interesting and different and exciting. But I would say that the Filipino, and you know, we have a battle, and I'd love to hear Mr. Roxas discuss it, between Filipino and Filipino as names, because I have several family members and constituents that I've known for many, many, many years in this community. And some of them refer to themselves as Filipino Americans and others as Filipino Americans. Maybe in your speech, Mr. Roxas, you can tell us what that's about. In any case, whatever the title, it is a group and an organization and a nation that has contributed much to America, has contributed much during World War II, the war efforts of Americans overseas. They were critical in the war in the Pacific and guiding naval operations and soldiers from our armies and the Allies. They have a long history in their community of being involved in medical services and in education. Education is very important in this community. And I've been proud over the years to represent parts of the Los Angeles Filipino American community. So I really want to thank Local District Central. I want to thank particularly those of you, Ms. Araguin, Dr. Spicer, those of you who put these events on, because they remind us that all of us need to be looking out for everybody. You cannot just look out for yourself. If you look out for yourself, you'll turn around and when you need help, there isn't going to be anybody there. We are a community. We are a community. We are a group of people who know that right now Asian Pacific Islanders have been attacked viciously for no reason other than some other elected officials having referred to the virus as being from origins of China, and that makes people crazy, I guess. I don't know. All I want to say to you is that it's very important that we all take into account that it is our responsibility. If we see something going down, we need to speak up. We need to not stand by and say, gee, I'm afraid to get involved. You see someone saying a thing, telling a joke, making a nasty remark, being racist about anybody. But in this month, particularly, we're focusing on Asian Pacific Island peoples. It is our human responsibility to say, don't count me in on that. I don't agree with that. That's wrong. If you're going to keep talking like that, I'm not going to stand around and listen to that terrible joke or see you do that racist thing. Nuh-uh, not in front of me. When we do that, we make it clear that if they're going to do what they're doing, we are not supporting them and we are not a part of it. That's really critical in all of these issues. So I'm going to end where I started. Thank you. Thank you to the 53 people who had so many things to do today already, and yet they're here. Thanks to all of the people who are about to present. And thank you, of course, to Mr. Roxas for taking his time to present to us the Filipino story. And also my last line, very quickly, get vaccinated. We all want everybody back in school. Get vaccinated. Goodbye.
Thank you, Board Member Goldberg. We very much appreciate your words, your connection, your allyship, and your recommendation to get vaccinated, which we need to do right away. I also want to mention that this is being recorded with YouTube Live, and we're also going to offer this to our advisory committees, our advisory periods, pardon, so that our students can also see the content because it's so rich. And now the next board member representative that I would like to introduce is a representative representing Monica Garcia. We have Ms. Teresa Cortez representing Board District 2. Thank you so much for being with us, Ms. Cortez, to offer remarks on behalf of Monica Garcia. The floor is yours, Ms. Cortez.
Thank you so much, Superintendent Baez. It is my pleasure to be with you all today. And on behalf of Board Member Garcia, I would like to thank you all for putting this town hall together as we celebrate our Asian Pacific American brothers and sisters. I also want to let you all know that we are learners, and as we learn from Mr. Roxas about the Filipino culture, we also stand with them. And like Board Member Goldberg mentioned, we stand against all the hate and attacks against the Asian American community, and we want to let you know that we stand with you, and we are here to be allies and support you all. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Cortez. And now it is my pleasure to hand the mic over to Mr. Spicer, who will introduce our guest speaker for today. And I'm very much looking forward to the learning. Mr. Spicer, thank you for making this possible today.
Thank you again, Superintendent Baez. It is my pleasure, it is my distinct honor to introduce to you Mr. Adrian Roxas. Mr. Roxas is a partner at Roxas Law, APC in Torrance, California. Adrian's the firm's lead trial attorney, handling all aspects of family law-related matters. Mr. Roxas represents victims of hate crimes on a pro bono basis. How about a round of applause for that? He also lectures on anti-Asian hate and victims' rights. Adrian is the president-elect of the Filipino American Bar Association, the oldest and largest local bar association addressing the legal needs of Filipino Americans. Adrian has zealously litigated high conflict family law disputes, mediated cases, and obtained or defended restraining orders. Prior to Rojas Law APS, Adrian was a prosecutor with the Los Angeles County's District Attorney's Office from 2007 to 2020, where he conducted jury trials to verdict and was a member of the Sex Crimes Division and the Victim Impact Program. Adrian has successfully tried cases involving sexual assault, child molestation, child abuse, domestic violence, murders, and special circumstance murders. Adrian was born and raised in Carson, California. He earned a BA in English, summa cum laude from Cal Poly Pomona, and his JD with honors from Southwestern Law School. And before I welcome Mr. Rojas with all of his accolades and accomplishments, I would be remiss not to tell you that he is an LA Unified alumni, a graduate of Carson High School. Welcome, Mr. Rojas. We are so happy to have you. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Mr. Spicer, and good evening to all of you. And before I forget to answer the question, I will try to take a stab at Ms. Goldberg's question about the difference between Filipino and Filipino. Now, my understanding is that Filipino with an F is the anglicized or Hispanized version of Filipino. And Filipino with a P is the way we would refer to ourselves traditionally in the Philippines, and it refers to our language as well as our people. I refer to myself as a Filipino American, born and raised in America, anglicized, and that's just the way I referred to myself growing up and as an adult. But both are interchangeable. I don't believe one is more superior to the other. So I hope that addresses your question, Ms. Goldberg. But first of all, thank you for having me tonight. We stand together, Asian American Voices. It's such a fitting series of events in celebration of our culture as Asian Americans, especially during the month of May as we celebrate Asian Pacific American Heritage Month. I do want to start out by giving a little background about myself. My parents were immigrants from the Philippines, and they both came here in Carson in 1976. And they arrived with six children ranging from 2 years old up until 9 years old. And I was their seventh child and the only one born and raised in America. And they settled in Carson, and that's where they stay. And my family still lives there, and we consider that place home. All of my brothers and sisters, all seven of us, as Mr. Spicer mentioned, graduated from LAUSD schools, Carroldale Elementary, Stephen White Middle School, and eventually Carson High School, home of the Colts, class of '97. I share this background because I do want to stress that I am a Filipino American born and raised in LA. And I'm receiving a message that I'm getting echo. I don't know how to control that. I apologize. Is it still echoing? Well, let's try this again.
Just a little bit, but you sound fine.
Okay, I do want to stress that I was born and raised in LA because that definitely shaped who I am as an attorney, who I am as a Filipino American, who I am as a former prosecutor in LA County, and currently who I am as an advocate for victims of hate crimes, regardless if you're Asian American, African American, Mexican American, any victim of hate crime, I represent them on a pro bono basis. And that's something that we at our firm take very seriously, and we are of service to the public if needed. I can tell you that as far as I can remember, we never had any events like this when I was a student at LAUSD. And it's a series of several weeks, and I applaud LAUSD, the organizers tonight, especially Mr. Spicer, Superintendent Baez, and Board Member Goldberg, in your efforts in bringing forth Filipino Americans and Asian Americans to the center stage. Now, let me preface my presentation by saying that I'm not a historian, I'm not an academic, I'm not a professor, but I am a Filipino American and a proud Filipino American. And I hope to give you a short snippet of over 400 years of history of what it means to be a Filipino and what it means to be a Filipino American in the United States. I'll try my best. I budgeted about 25 to 30 minutes of my presentation, and I hope to discuss who we are, our historical experiences in America and specifically in California, our contributions, and where we stand today, particularly with the rise in hate incidents and hate crimes, the legislations to address that, and how Asians and our allies can support each other moving forward to combat hate incidents and hate crimes. If I could have the next slide, please. Now, the country of the Philippines is an island country, also known as an archipelago, located off the southeast coast of Asia. We are comprised of over 7,100 islands, over 7,000 islands, and it's estimated that our population in the country is over 108 million. Now, culturally, we are predominantly of Malay descent, and we are heavily influenced by Spanish, Chinese, American cultures. And we've been colonized by Spain, the United States, and Japan over the course of our 400 years of history. Now, our languages predominantly are English, surprisingly enough. In the Philippines, the national languages are English and Tagalog, also known as Filipino. And in terms of religion, Christianity is the biggest makeup of who Filipinos are in the Philippines, with a small percentage of Islam in southern Philippines. I'll take the next slide, please. Now, for the sake of time, I will talk briefly about the Spanish and American influences on the Philippines, because those two cultures up to this day have made their marks, and their cultures remain in current times. Now, the 7,000 islands that make up the Philippines have had a complex history with raging battles and political influences from both within the country and from foreign countries. However, the most potent and prevalent of all these forces continues to be the Spanish reign, which dominated the country for more than 300 years, beginning in 1521, when Ferdinand Magellan made landfall in the Philippines. This portion of the Philippine history, known as the Spanish Philippines, or Spanish colonial period. Now, even though the Spanish stopped ruling the country over hundreds of years ago, you can still see the effects on the Philippines today. And one of the most obvious ways that the era of the Spanish Philippines still affects the country is with religion and architecture. Spain brought Christianity, as it did with many other countries in this world. It's estimated that the Philippines is 81% Catholic, and a little over 5% of the population is Muslim, and the remaining offsets of the Christian faith, including Protestants. It's said that when you go to the Philippines or a Filipino household in the United States, you can see the influence of Catholicism in the forms of saints, crosses, and statues. And the Spanish colonial period has left these marks on the Filipino culture, and these residues last even till today. I'll take the next slide, please. You also see it in our language. Take, for example, the Spanish and Tagalog words for the months of the year. The Tagalog words are in red, and they are identical to the pronunciation of the Spanish words in blue. Now, about 1/3 of our words in Tagalog are of Spanish origin, and over 6,000 words in other Filipino dialects and languages come from the Spanish language as well. And you see it in our names. My dad's name was Arsenio Santiago Rojas. My grandparents were Jose Antonio Rojas and Maria Iluminada Rojas. I'll take the next slide. And you also see it in our food. Today we have heavily Spanish influenced food such as arroz caldo, paella, champurrado, pan de sal, and menudo. And these are all common staples that we eat even till today. I'll take the next slide. Now, following Spain's colonization of the Philippines, the United States exercised a formal colonial rule over the Philippines. And we were at one point the largest overseas colony between 1899 and 1946. And Board Member Goldberg alluded to this in her introductory remarks. Now, after the Spanish-American War, when Spain surrendered the Spanish colony of the Philippines to America, we began to see American economic and strategic interests in Asia and the Pacific Islands in the late 1890s. Now, this historically also coincided with the wake of an industrial depression and in the face of global inter-imperial competition. Spanish colonialism was simultaneously being weakened by revolts from other colonies that belonged to Spain at the time, including the Philippines. Between 1899 and 1946, Filipino American colonialism also transformed both the Philippine landscape and the United States relations with the Philippines, culturally and economically. In the Philippines, the colonial state introduced a secular, free public school system that emphasized the English language, which is why we still have that language being used today as, quote unquote, one of the national languages. There's also industrial manual training to facilitate what America wanted from the Philippines, which was a capitalistic and economic developed country. Now, while the Filipino elite, the wealthy status, the wealthy individuals, while they retained and developed the Spanish as a language of literature, politics, and prestige, they viewed American language as vulgar. And Filipinos at the time increasingly learned and transformed English and thereafter used it for their own purposes. I'll take the next slide, please. Now, for good or for bad, I mean, there's a lot of controversy with regards to this. America brought social reforms and economic development to the Philippines. That's just the reality of what it means to be a colony of a superpower such as the United States, or a more quote unquote industrial country such as Spain. Now, cultural changes, as soon as America took over the Philippines, it was very prominent. During colonization, we began to see the early signs of quote unquote the American dream. And this American dream carries till today with the Filipinos who remain in the Philippines, hoping to come to America for a better life, just as my family did in 1976. Now, America also had a huge influence on the country's economy. At the time, America's goal, as I mentioned earlier, was to build infrastructure, was to build highways, was to build facilities for harbors and seaports, to exploit the mines, and to benefit commerce and trade. And Americans also set their eyes on the agricultural capacity of the Philippines. There's a lot of land, a lot of trees, a lot of natural resources in the Philippines. And this drew criticism because America was essentially exploiting the natural resources of the Philippines. And America also brought politics, the idea of being self-governed and democratic values, quote unquote, democratic values that the Americans instilled in the Filipinos. And we also see how Philippines slowly began being an export-oriented country, where a lot of our resources were being exported out of the country during the US colonial time. Now, slowly and over the years, we now have Filipinos who are seeing the influence of America and the American dream. I'll take the next slide. Now, to this day, the American dream holds true for all Filipinos, especially with my family and every other immigrant family that I know who's come here from the Philippines, leaving everything they've owned, everything that they know back in the Philippines. They truly believe that if we work hard, if we continue to bring hope to ourselves, that we can attain this American dream. And that's something that started way back and was instilled in the Filipinos' mind back when America was colonizing the Philippines. I'll take the next slide. Now, let me talk a little bit about the Filipinos in America, how we got here, when we got here. The Filipinos make up the third largest community of Asian immigrants in the United States, slightly behind the Chinese and the Indians. The immigration patterns of the Filipinos can be broken up into four significant waves. The first wave was connected to the period when the Philippines was part of Spain. And Filipinos came to California, specifically Morro Bay, on Manila galleons, which is basically these trade ships that you see here on this slide. And the first permanent settlement of Filipinos in the United States was actually in Louisiana in the late 1700s, known as Saint Malo, and they were there as Manila men working in the shrimp and fishery industry. The second wave was during the period when the Philippines were a territory of the United States, also known as colonialism, when Philippines was a colony of the United States. US nationals, we were at that point US nationals because we were a colony of the Philippines, and we were unrestricted from immigrating from the Philippines to the United States, unlike other Asian immigrants that were barred by the Immigration Act of 1917. Now, Filipinos of this wave came for different reasons, but the majority were laborers. They were farm workers. They worked in the fields. And this wave of immigration was distinct from other Asian Americans due to the American influences in education in the Philippines. A lot of Filipinos during this time who immigrated at this time did not see themselves as aliens because they had adopted a lot of the culture, the American culture that the Americans brought to the Philippines during colonization. Now, beginning in 1901, Filipinos were allowed to enlist in the US Navy, and Ms. Goldberg referred to this earlier. And while serving, Filipino sailors would bring over their spouse from the Philippines or marry a spouse in the United States, parenting and raising children who would be part of the distinct Navy-related Filipino American immigrant community. Now, before the end of World War I, Filipino sailors were allowed to serve in a number of ranks. However, due to a change of rules during the war periods, Filipino sailors were restricted to officers and stewards, basically in the mess halls and cooks. Filipinos who immigrated to the United States due to their military service were exempt from quota restrictions, and I'll talk about that in a few minutes, basically limiting the amount of Filipinos who can come to the United States. Now, this ended in 1946 following the independence of the Philippines from the United States, but resumed in 1947 due to language inserted in some act and agreement between the United States and the Philippines. And the third wave of immigration, just briefly, followed the events of World War II. Filipinos who had served in World War II were given options of becoming US citizens, and many took opportunity. Approximately over 10,000 Filipinos. Filipino war brides were allowed to immigrate to the United States. And along with that, there was an influx of Filipinos born in the United States. Now, I talked earlier about immigration quotas, and the source of immigration was the Loose Seller Act of 1946 that gave Filipinos up to 100 immigrants into the United States. I'll take the next slide, please. Now, the fourth and present wave, which is the wave that we're dealing with after 1960s or 1970s, we see an increase and a more formalized immigration pattern from the Philippines into America with the passing of the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965. At the time, it ended national quotas and provided an unlimited number of visas for family reunification. And you see in this chart, by the 1970s and the 1980s, the immigration of Filipinos reached astronomical numbers in terms of comparing it from the year before. Now, the Philippines became the largest source of legal immigration to the United States from Asia. And many Filipinos in this new migration period migrated here because of their professional status. Many were nurses, and we filled the shortage of nurses between 1966 and 1991. And during that period, over 35,000 Filipino nurses came to the United States under the working visa and attaining permanent status after working here for a certain amount of years. And as of 2015, over 65% of foreign trade nurses come from the Philippines alone. Now, in terms of numbers, most of the Filipinos that live in America actually live in California. We have more than 1.6 million Filipinos in the United States. And in that, the greater Los Angeles area is home to the largest subset of Filipinos outside of Manila, over 600,000 in the greater Los Angeles area alone. I'll take the next slide, please. Now, where do we stand in terms of historical contributions the Filipinos' contributions to America, to California, and to Los Angeles. We don't learn about this in our textbooks, so this is a perfect platform for me to share our importance in American history. And suffice to say that Filipino Americans have made significant contributions to our nation. As far as in the early 1920s, Filipino Americans left their country, they left their families in the Philippines, they worked on plantations in Hawaii and California, they worked in the fisheries in Washington and Alaska. And during World War II, Filipino Americans, both here and in the Philippines, fought for the United States on behalf of this country, the United States, during World War II, in an effort to protect the United States' freedom and secure peace around the world. In the late 60s and 70s, many Filipino professionals left the Philippines to help fill the workforce that was needed here in America, specifically in engineering, nursing and technology and medicine. And as families and veterans and professionals grew in America, their families also took critical jobs that helped develop the growth of the United States in terms of our economy and in terms of our country's health. We've worked in the health field, service industry, hospitality, technology, education, government, armed forces, construction, you name it. We're all in all of those industries. And one person I do want to highlight is Larry Itliong. And you may hear his name, especially around Filipino Town in Los Angeles in the Echo Park area. He is, to me, one of our national heroes as a Filipino American. He was a Filipino American organizer, a community leader, one of the earliest community leaders in America. And he played an important role in the farm labor movement, including the Delano Grape Strike of 1960. Now, he left the Philippines when he was a teenager and he arrived in the United States in 1929. And he had this dream, just as every other Filipino who comes here. He had this American dream of becoming a lawyer. But instead, he saw the need to become a migrant worker and a labor organizer to put forth the rights of the Filipinos who were working in the farms. He was called a manong, and what manong means in Tagalog is a respectful term. Sorry, not Tagalog, in Ilocano, it's a different dialect. What that means is it's a respectful term when you talk to somebody who is older. It also means an older brother. It's a term of endearment. And he was definitely a manong to a lot of Filipino Americans. And we see in the photo here, we see Cesar Chavez. He's obviously a stakeholder and he was a huge part of the labor movement in America. But alongside him was Larry Itliong. And you don't hear of Larry Itliong that much, and maybe you've never heard of Larry Itliong. But it was, in fact, Larry Itliong who was the one who coordinated the initial labor action that grew into the wide range boycotting that's often associated with Cesar Chavez. I'll take the next slide. And now there are also other Filipino Americans that have made their mark in this country. We have Dr. Connie Mariano, who was President Bill Clinton's personal physician. We have Chef Comerford, who was the first, actually the only Filipino American who was the executive chef in the White House since President George W. Bush. And we have Benjamin Cayetano, who was the first Filipino American legislator and governor. And of course, we have more quote unquote known individuals like Apple Diab, who's from Black Eyed Peas, and Eric Spolstra from Miami Heat. And these are just a few Filipino American notables. And for me, because I'm a lawyer, I do want to highlight, sorry, the next slide, yes, you're right. I do want to highlight that we have the first Filipino American and Asian American Chief Justice of the states. And that is Chief Justice Tani Cantil-Secahuye. She's the 28th Chief Justice of the state of California, and she was sworn into office in 2011, and she is of Filipino descent. And most recently, you may have heard, we have Rob Banta, who is the first Filipino American legislator in California, taking that spot in 2012. And more recently, as recent as last month, was slated or took the spot as Attorney General the highest ranking prosecutor spot in the state of California, and he is also Filipino American. I'll take the next slide. Now, despite the successes of Filipino Americans, it was not always a land of milk and honey for Filipino Americans or any other immigrant that's ever stepped foot in this country. Like all immigrants and all people of color, we faced discrimination and injustice, and we were not spared from any of that. Historically, we've faced legal roadblocks aimed specifically at Filipino Americans. I'll highlight a few, such as the California Civil Code, which refused marriage license to Mongolians, Negroes, mulattoes, and persons of mixed blood. That's the exact words of the text. And of course, as Filipinos, we were lumped into the Mongolians. In 1899, we see Rudyard Kipling's The White Man's Burden. We've heard of this, and this is a poem that encouraged, quote unquote, encouraged America to take over the Philippines and to colonize the Philippines because the white race was more superior and more morally obliged to civilize the non-whites of the Philippines and not the non-whites of this earth. And we also see the Filipino Naturalization Act, which set an annual immigration quota of no more than 100 immigrants per year in this country. We'll take the next slide. And this leads me, and I'll end on this note, on this topic, sorry, not this note, on this topic, where we stand today. And as Filipino Americans, we've traced our history in this country for over 400 years, but we still continue to see the challenges, most notably and most recently with the rise of anti-Asian hate sentiments. Here we are over a year into the pandemic, and unfortunately, we are still seeing a rise of anti-Asian hate incidents and hate crimes. Now, these incidents and crimes are not new. It's part of American history, a shameful part of America's history. And unless we do something ourselves, as Board Member Goldberg mentioned earlier, it will continue to occur. And today I do want to talk a little bit about bystander intervention. You may have seen actually in the last month, images that I put on here on the screen. This is an image from a Filipino American who was attacked in New York. Her name is Miss Carrie, and she was walking to church on a Sunday morning, and she was punched and kicked until she fell to the ground. And the assailant attacked her and basically said, "Go back to your country, you don't belong here," and made other racist remarks. Our other Asian brothers and sisters, as well as African Americans, our Black communities, and our Latino communities have also been subjected to this type of hate in American history. Now, particularly with this incident, what bothered me the most was that there were two individuals who you kind of see here on the images, two males who stood by and did nothing. And you see a third male later on coming around to close the door as Miss Carrie, the Filipino American, laid on the ground after she had just been attacked. And I do want to echo what was said earlier. If you see something, you need to do something. And I do want to talk about bystander intervention here. I'll take the next slide. I notice we have 12 minutes left, so I will try to finish this up in about 5 minutes. Now, bystander intervention can be broken up into what's known as the 5 Ds. I did not make this up. I did not create this. I'm borrowing this, and I've given you the source on this slide, and it's from ihollaback.com. And they train on what it means to be a bystander and how to intervene if you see something happening. And the first D is to distract. Now, the aim here at this point is basically to derail the incident. If you see something happening, just create a distraction. Talk to the person who's being attacked, or talk to the person who's being harassed. Get in the way, physically get in the way. You don't have to touch anybody, but get in the way so that the attack will stop or the incident will stop. Do something that's out of the ordinary, like spill your coffee, create a distraction, just so the focus is no longer on the victim who's being harassed. I'll take the next slide. And the next D is delegation. This is when you ask for assistance, you ask help from a third party, scream, talk to somebody, yell at somebody to call for help. Delegate and have someone come in if you're not able to break that interaction or that incident where the victim is being attacked. I'll take the next slide.
The third D is to document. After assessing the situation, take notes, write down what you have. We all have cell phones. If you can, document it by video. Send yourself a text message. Write down who the descriptions of the attacker was, where it happened, the time, the location. So that way it can be reported accurately. And the next D is to delay. If you're not able to act in that moment, you can still make a difference by checking in on the person who has been attacked. Check in on the person who's been attacked and ask how that person is doing, and ask if they're okay, and see if you can help them get to a safe place. I'll take the next slide. And the last is to direct. And this is basically what you're doing here is, this is a little bit more risky. And the harasser may redirect their abuse towards you. So be careful during this phase. You can tell the person you can tell the attacker, what you're doing is inappropriate. You're being disrespectful. Leave them alone. Or say something like, you're a racist. You can't say stuff like that. That's what I mean by direct. And I believe that by stepping in and taking a stand, you don't have to get physical. You don't have to physically defend yourself. You have a lot of non-violent, non-contact ways, and that's what I like to stress in these talks, is to make sure that you are there to help the person who's being attacked and to bring a stop to what's happening. There are a lot of resources here, and I'll just quickly list them, and you can see them. There's law enforcement agencies, there's the city attorneys, there is the district attorney's office, and a lot of nonprofit organizations. And I'll take the next slide. And LA City Attorney, the website has a lot of resources, as well as the district attorney's office. They have a lot of resources for victims of hate crimes. On the next slide. And here are the next slide. There are some community resources. I can take the next slide, please. And one more slide, sorry. There you go. There's a lot of resources for Asian Pacific Americans who are victims of hate, and they're listed here. And I believe I shared the slide with the organizers tonight, so they may have that information if you need it. And I'll take the next slide. And if you go on hatecrimebook.com, there is a really fantastic publication on a practical approach on how to report hate crimes. And most recently today, earlier this morning, as I was in court, I learned that President Biden signed the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act. And this particular act is an important step towards confronting the wave of racism and discrimination that we've seen across the country in this past year. Basically, what this does is it expands efforts to make reporting of a crime, of hate crimes, more accessible at the local levels, including providing online resources, reporting resources, and in many different languages, not just English as it currently stands. And I'll take the last slide. And I will end, I don't know what happened to this slide, but I'll end on this slide. And it's a quote that says, it's supposed to say, he who does not know how to look back at where he came from will never get to his destination. And I'll read that again. He who does not know how to look back at where he came from will never get to his destination. And this is a quote from a Filipino hero named Dr. Jose Rizal. He was a hero during the American colonization, and he helped lead the decolonization of the Philippines. And this quote particularly speaks true to me. I mentioned earlier that I am very proud to be a part of LAUSD school system. And I think by looking back at where I came from and looking back at how I was raised in LA and the people that I have interacted with and my family and friends and my communities, I look back on them every day just to make sure that I know where my destination is going to be. And with that, I will end my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rojas. A big, warm, virtual round of applause for our guest, Mr. Rojas. I have to tell you, you started your presentation by saying you're not an educator. I beg to differ. What a great lesson. Thank you so much. We do have a little time for a few questions, and I actually had a question for you. We'll let you hydrate a little bit. So as you've heard today, we're really intent in Local District Central of uplifting every one of our groups, especially those at the margins. You have any advice for us, because you are an LAUSD alum, you were a student in LA Unified, how can we even better serve our Filipino American community? How can we uplift those students who may not always be heard, to be quite honest with you?
Right. I think this is the perfect step. Tonight's platform is something I've never seen as an LAUSD student, and I don't even know that this is occurring in other districts. I think this is a perfect platform in bringing forth awareness to the Filipino culture, our contributions, and where we stand today in terms of anti-Asian hate. This is a platform that I've never seen before, so I truly appreciate it. But I also think that getting involved in the communities, there's a Filipino town in LA, not too far from your district, and there's Echo Park, that's heavily populated with Filipino Americans. Visit our restaurants, visit our people, go try our food. We have fantastic food. We have a great cuisine that's influenced by Chinese, Spanish, American. Learn, educate yourself about the Filipino culture by learning the culture and being a part of that culture.
Well, thank you for that advice. Thank you so much. And I think we'll take you up on that. I think that's good sound advice. We all, food is for the soul. Another question, and then we're going to go to our Q&A very quickly here. The hate, we're all discussing about it. And you gave us some great pointers on how to disrupt, some of this hateful behavior, right? What advice would you give to any of our, maybe our young folk who feel that racism and that hatred, and they've actually been victims, but they don't want to speak out? Because, we're all about empowering our student voice. Any advice for any of our students who feel like they've been victimized just because of the color of their skin?
Absolutely. And I'll speak generally, and I'll speak directly to the Asian community and Filipino community. Generally, you have to speak up, okay? I mean, you have to report it. You have to report it to an adult. You have to report it to your teacher. You have to report it to law enforcement authorities if it gets to that point. But specifically with the Asian American community and the Filipino community, historically and culturally, we are taught to remain quiet. We are taught not to react. We are taught to be submissive people. That's the stereotype, and that's what we are taught at home. But this is not the time to sit back. This is not the time to be subdued and just accept what's happening to you. If you are a victim of hate incident or a hate crime, you have to report it, because without any reporting, nothing is going to be done, and these types of incidents will not stop. So I encourage everyone, Filipino, Asian or not, to step out of their comfort zone and make that report. Stand up if you're a bystander, say something, and make it known so that this type of racism and incidents stop.
Amazing. Thank you. We have one last question from our parent and community administrator, Mrs. Teresa Ergin. She wants to know, who are your mentors? Because we want to have as many little Mr. Rojases and Miss Rojases and others as possible. Who are your mentors? Who helped pave the way for you?
I have a college counselor. She's now retired, Carson High. Her name was Miss Coletti. She and I remain in good contact together. And my algebra teacher, my math teacher, her name is Miss Engel. I actually got a C in math, but she was someone who invested her time in me as an educator. She believed in me, and Miss Coletti as well led me in that direction. But I also believe that a lot of this, it starts from the home, right? I mean, a lot of us are parents, and a lot of us have kids. This type of dedication to the community, I believe, starts in the home, and I am a true believer of that. And it doesn't have to be a physical home. It doesn't have to be, the nuclear family. What I mean by home is find a community that you are comfortable with, and make that community your home, and they will support you in whatever you need.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much. Unfortunately, good things do have to come to an end. It was just absolutely fabulous hearing your story, hearing your journey, but also how you connect that to our community, and more importantly, to our students. So we want to thank you again for taking your time after a busy day in court, fighting for us. And I want to give our superintendent, Mrs. Baez, an opportunity to end with us today. Thanks again, Mr. Rojas.
Of course, thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rojas. This was such a pleasure, an honor, a learning experience to hear your presentation. And yes, know that we see you as an educator as well. K-12 or college, we will take your recording and present it to our students during advisory and also to our summer program. I didn't get to mention, but LD Central is sponsoring a variety of cultural history heritage courses in summer. One is about Filipino American history, Korean American history, Japanese American history, Chinese American history, and various other cultural historical perspectives and background of the communities that we serve. So this is very important. Your quote really resonated with me because it helps ground what we've been leading from the heart in Local District Central, but when we saw the quote, we really resonated with it. He who does not know how to look back at where he came from will never get to his destination. And we all believe that when we tap into our assets, our community, our background and history, we can propel, move forward. Your ancestors would be very proud of you, Mr. Rojas. Your ancestors are proud of you. Thank you for representing the Filipino community and for representing what's great in LA Unified is graduating students like you who are now an alumni they're coming back to continue to build us and support us. So thank you.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Okay, everyone, that was a word from our leader, and we want to thank everyone who spent so much time preparing us for tonight's town hall, especially our special guests, but Mrs. Erdogan, Mrs. Herrera, Mr. Chow, Ms. Alice Cho, and everyone else who came, our board members. We appreciate you so much, and we look forward to seeing you at our next town hall, where we're going to be featuring our Japanese American families, and that will be May 25th at 5 p.m. And we'll have none other than Dr. Dean Tagawa, LAUSD, our Early Education Executive Director. And I got to tell you, it's going to be fabulous. Everyone, have a great night. We'll see you soon.